All right. So I have a pretty complicated character here in some ways and very simple in other ways, but the most basic shapes are just this big oval and this wedge. And the important thing is how they overlap, right? And I did the wedge up to there instead of down here because this is an oval for the arms that connects through. And that helps kind of understand the flow of this design. Then there's a little wedge that's cut out of the bottom here. And then for the horns, these are a little trickier. I might do those with two ovals and then triangles. Notice I'm not trying to get them exactly right. I'm just trying to indicate the right space. And then you have wedges at the base here. He's got a little sword, which is all just long ovals, or you could do triangles, or you could do rectangles. There's no wrong way to just fill up the space, but you want to keep it as simple as you can, and then I'll delineate the hands. So if I turn off that back layer, I can see what my basic shapes are doing. The complexity of this character is placements of features on the face, and because the face is so broad, instead of just tracing these rectangles, because it'd be very hard to see how that rectangle relates to this, and I would have a hard time reproducing it. I'm going to instead draw these kind of action lines dividing it up, drawing down the middle of the head and then drawing down across the head so that I have some reference for placing and sizing those eye slits. All right, why do we do it this way? Well, this is my tracing, my diagram of this character. Now, we're going to save it, and because it's our own name, we're just going to say File, Save. But because it's now has an extra layer in it, even if I have that layer turned off at the moment, it's not going to want to save it as a JPEG or as a PNG anymore. It's going to want to save it as a Photoshop file. This is the default file type within Photoshop for anything that's more than one layer. And the shorthand for that is PSD, so notice that it automatically adds PSD to the end of my file. Photoshop file is what I want. It goes to the desktop. If it shows up anywhere else, what do? We hit Command D, and it will automatically change to the desktop. And then I hit Save. And now this will show up for you, because these are new programs of Photoshop. Turn on Don't Show Again, because of course we always want to have maximum compatibility with our PSD files. It might take a little bit longer to open and close, but we use Photoshop file format when we're working on something. We always want it to be the highest quality. And then if you click Don't Show Again, we won't get this again. All right. The other thing we want to do in Photoshop now, this is just setting it up, we are on default settings. And default settings for all of you looks just like what I have on my screen under painting. There are two things I want you to do extra from default settings. First is hit Command R. You do that once you have a file open, and that's going to turn on your rulers. And so this shows you the actual physical dimensions if you were to print the image. So right now, if I were to print this image, it would be 8 inches by 9 inches. That doesn't mean that it's a high resolution, but that means what its print physical dimensions are. The other thing I want you to do is go up to Photoshop, go to Preferences, and go to Performance. This can be a little tricky to do with your stylus, so you can feel free to do it with your mouse. But the performance settings, they've upped them a little bit. They used to be only 20 history states. Now it's at 50. We're going to move that up to 200. Or a little above 200. It doesn't have to be exact. That's how many steps Photoshop will remember that we've done. And that way, that's 200 and some steps that we can undo if we need to. That keeps us from having to save it after we do something all the time. We still want to save it whenever we're happy with it or whenever we're done working with it. But let's say I didn't like those lines. Well, I can open up my history under Window, and I can walk back a lot of steps and revisit them and restart it at any point. So it's like a little time machine backup for your work process. And the shortcut for that is Command Z. So what do I mean by that? So let's say you do something you don't like. You want to immediately undo it. Command Z immediately undoes it. It goes back one history state. But if you hit Command Z again, it just redoes it. So Command Z will undo in Photoshop and then redo, which is very helpful. Because if I draw a mustache on him, say, do I like that mustache? Yes, no, yes, no. We do a lot of that. But if I want to go back further steps, the shortcut is to hold down Shift, Command, and Z. Strike that. Control, Command, and Z. Strike that. Option, Command, and Z. There we go. Now, I actually don't like 3-key shortcuts because they're easy to screw up. But luckily, Shift, Command, and Z and Control, Command, and Z don't seem to do any problem. On Macs, the Control button is the Option button. Or the Alt button is the Option button, and the Command button is the Control button on PCs. So there's a little bit of a difference there. But you'll get used to it. The Command key, which is next to the space bar, which is Control, I think, on a PC, is the biggest shortcut key we'll use. So Command Z is the same as Control Z on a PC. All right. You can also just go through your history window and do it by hand that way, if you ever make a mistake. But we're not going to make any mistakes. All right. With those settings, we changed our history states, we turned on rulers. Now we want to save it again. But this time we've already checked it all. We've already changed it to a Photoshop file. So the shortcut for saving is just Command S. So we can go to File, Save, and it will do it. Or we can just do Command S, and it will update it and save it. Now I'm going to minimize Photoshop. Okay? And that shrinks it down into our dock, where we can bring it up again. We haven't closed Photoshop, but we have saved a PSD file and our original character reference. So far, those are the two files we need. Now, I'm going to go back, open Photoshop back up, and I'm going to open up a new file. That new file, I'm going to say File, New, and I get to decide what the resolution is. I don't have to just take the resolution from a given image online. So this is like getting out your sketchbook or getting out a nice piece of canvas or watercolor paper. Our default size, so don't worry about what's built in, our lab's default size is going to be 8 by 10 inches. Actually, let's change it this semester because this is a better version of Photoshop. It's going to be 9 by 12 inches. So I'm going to make this 9 inches wide, because my character is taller than they are wide, and 12 inches tall. I want it to be inches here, not pixels, not picas, not anything else. Our default resolution, the resolution we should always work in as a standard, is just a little bit above professional grade. So professional printing is at 300 pixels per inch. We want 350. And so this is a custom size, and we're going to save that preset. Okay. And we're going to have that preset name. 9 inches by 12 inches is just fine. But not only will that preset be 9 by 12 inches, it will also be 350 pixels per inch. So if you ever forget, you'll have that built into the document type whenever you open a new file. All right. Sometimes we'll go bigger than that, but generally that's a good default. Our background is going to be white. Our color profile is going to be what it is. Our pixel aspect ratio should be square. All of this is good. We say OK, it opens up a new white sheet, 9 by 12 inches, 350 pixels per inch. The problem is, it's like tabs in a browser window. You can't look at both of them at once. And what we want to do is be able to look at this and then draw on this. So now we have to arrange our files. We could do that just like we do with browser windows, and you can just sweep one out. But that has problems. But I want you all to try it. So sweep it out. That's great. But the problem is if I then click on this one, the other is floating behind it in a way that's really hard to find. So once you've swept it out, I want you to put it back in. Nest it back in. I'm going to close my history window here, but if you ever need it, it's up here in default settings. So how do I get to see both of them within the working space of Photoshop, within this gray format? I go up to Window, and I go to Arrange, and I'm going to say to up vertical. That way I can have both images showing within the format at the same time. I like to have my reference off to the right because I'm right-handed. So right now that the reference is off to the right, I'm going to zoom out with a shortcut. I don't need to use the magnifying glass. I can just do Command minus until it's a nice size. I can move that border a little bit, and I can zoom out even a little bit more. So that I can see my full working area as large as possible and my reference. Then I can click on this tab so that I can start working on this image. And what am I going to do first? You'll notice that because I created a new image, it doesn't say layer 0, it says background here. And it has an open lock on it. I'm going to leave that as a background layer. And I'm going to make a new layer floating above it. And that just has, I have various reasons for doing that, but we'll learn more about that later. Now I'm going to try to draw my character right here. Okay? But in order to do that, I want to turn off the background, so I'm only looking at my basic shapes. So very quickly, why do we do it this way? Well, if I wanted to draw something, let's say in my sketchbook, and I don't have any understanding of its basic shapes, this is how I might go about drawing it. I might be really focused on the details. I might do a contour drawing and really try to get the curve of those horns to match. Try to get the overall shape of the helmet and all the details. And I'm naturally going to draw the things I'm most interested in first. And then the body. And every detail is kind of screaming for attention at this point. But I don't have any plan or structure to it. And even if I start to use basic shapes for simplifying things like the arms and the hands, I've already messed up in terms of professionalism here. And the reason I've messed up is because my proportions are off. And I can tell just right now that I made the body too long and not angled enough to go with that head. And if I look at the negative shapes in between the horns, I didn't make it quite wide enough at the top. And I didn't make this angle here quite shallow enough. And so then I can go and erase and kind of fix it all like I would with a Drawing One project, really trying to match it. But much better, let's create just a new layer. And instead of trying to draw it without understanding the basic shapes, let's only look at our basic shapes. Now I can start with just drawing that oval. And I use all of my careful observation to try to make that oval match. And then divide it up. That can be very sketchy here. And notice my same brush is a lot thinner because I'm working at a higher resolution now. Then I can reproduce my shapes